Hey everybody, welcome back to the show.
Good evening.
Long time no see, everybody. We kind of messed up and missed a week last week just due to hunting and traveling and all that kind of stuff. But
Who's the
here
weird
we
looking
are.
guy with the beard on the right?
Oh yeah, we got a third co-host for this episode. Erik's gonna talk to us this
Hey,
week
Erik.
because
Hey, how is everybody tonight?
good.
Good.
How are you? Did you go hunting tonight?
I didn't make it out tonight. Work restrictions.
Oh dang!
So,
Gotta work on that
You're your
boss.
own boss. You're gonna have to work on the
Yeah.
yell at your boss about your hours.
yeah, I was supposed to call in and take the day off today, but he said nope. Got to go to work. So
Yeah. Sometimes that happens when you're your own boss. You get a little in over your head.
right.
But oh well. No. You went last night though, didn't you?
I did make it out last night. Yep.
You see anything last night?
I didn't see anything, and I kind of made a mistake because I had a certain bed that I wanted to hunt, and I just wasn't feeling too confident with the way the wind was playing. And on the way out, I can actually pick his exit trail up. So I decided to pick up one of his exit trails on the way out of the woods, and I picked up on some extremely fresh scat. I mean, it was laid down that evening, so I really should have just sat my spot. But I think you guys know what it feels like when you sit in a spot and you're not feeling confident, in that spot. So I moved on, and I did a little scouting on my way in and got onto some different hot sign, and I didn't have anything come out. So
Yeah.
but you'll have that. It's hunting, so
Right, for sure. Yeah, I had a pretty good set last night. So obviously you guys saw I killed one last night with a longbow. But we're not going to get into a whole lot of details on it yet because we're going to probably get on another podcast or another show here pretty soon and specifically talk about that one on a separate show because we had almost a whole week in Michigan that us three were running around up there in Michigan. That's what we wanted to talk about tonight. So anyway. Before we start, though, if you guys don't know how it works, if you're new to the show here, just in the comments section, just leave your questions in the comments, and then we'll get to them at the end of the podcast, or as many as we can. And then also, I will put a link in the comments here after a bit to call in if you want to get on to the show and ask a question live. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. I'm going to take this layer off here because you can't see anybody Erik's name, but my little let's see if I can remove it here. There it is. There, that's better. Now you can see Erik's name at least. But yeah, if you guys like what we're doing, make sure you subscribe. That really helps. Make sure you hit the like button. That tells YouTube that it's a good video to recommend, and then the snowball gets rolling with YouTube on that kind of stuff. But we got a bunch of people on tonight, so anyway, I'm trying to think. Oh, before we talk about mission, let's talk about what we got going on this week, Dan. Just so we don't forget.
Yeah, the Battle of the Bows. So we got a beast challenge going on. It's going to be in hill country, and we are going to an area that's pretty rich on good bucks. So I'm hoping that some good bucks get killed. We got a pretty big sized crew going.
Yeah.
Who all we got going? I think Mario's going to make an appearance. Ricky's going to be there.
Yep.
Who else?
We're gonna the YouTube channel. The Stick Boys are coming. They're kind of representing the traditional archery group there.
The editor of Crossbow Magazine. What's his name? Do you remember?
Todd something. I can't remember his last name.
Bromley, is it?
Yeah, something like that.
Todd Bromley.
Yep.
And we picked somebody from the one of the viewers at Films.
Yep, Savannah. I was in contact with her today, so we're all good there. Savannah's coming. Savannah Outdoors on YouTube. Who else? I think that's it, right? I don't think we're forgetting anybody. That sounds like all of them. Tim's going to be there.
Going, yeah. I don't want to forget anybody. But we're going to have a pretty big crew. And what we're going to do is just turn everybody loose, and they can go where they want. The rule is they have to make it back to camp every evening. And it should be fun. Everybody's got to film, and we'll put together a show afterwards. And I love these challenges. So for me, that's a cool way to hunt.
Yeah, for sure. I'm excited. I've never hunted over there.
If it goes the way it's been going, Josh will kill everything.
I don't know. Tim reminded me just now that Uncle Lou is coming also. So there's another guy that'll try to kill everything.
He will kill everything he sees, that's for sure.
Yeah, right. Whatever's in season.
That guy is a killer.
Whatever's in season.
Yeah.
Whether it be grouse or turkey or deer, it's all fair game. So
it's fun to have him along because he gives us so much cell strip. We get to, make tents out of it. We get to fix our cars.
All right. Rolls and rolls of stealth strips.
Mm-hmm.
Lou was on the other last episode, and people love whenever he gets on. He's just a hoot to listen to talk. I had a few. Yeah, we should have just an episode where he gets on and we shoot the bull with him. But yeah, that'll be probably, we're going to probably get the Michigan videos up, and then get the Battle of the Bows videos will come after that. So that's all probably in the next couple of weeks. You guys get to look forward to all that content coming to the channel, and it'll be a bunch of content. I know Michigan will be a good video too. So
yeah, it's kind of good that you got that Indiana buck down, because now you might have a little more time for editing.
Yeah.
For me, it's really hard for me to keep up with my editing with hunting.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I can imagine, especially when you're working, whatever, 8 or 10 hours. Yeah.
How much time
gotta stop.
How much time will you really have though, Josh? Because you got Wisconsin coming up, and then you have a Michigan tag as well that you can fill now.
Yeah. So. I'll have time. I'll make time for it. Maddie she's pretty excited about me not having a tag, so I can take her and get her a buck. So that's something we can work on. But she can't.
Oh yeah, that would be a great video too.
Yeah, she can't hunt. She works until about 4:30, so she can't really hunt during the week very very easily. But so it won't be a whole bunch of hunts. But yeah, and she probably won't be too picky. So
and your boy will get some time with grandma, get some ice cream sandwiches.
Yeah, milkshakes.
Yeah.
He got one today. So yeah, there's not a shortage of those over there. No, that's something. And I may go over to Ohio too, maybe during the rut, like before our gun season starts or something, like second weekend of November maybe. I think Ohio's gun season comes in late. If anybody's from Ohio, let me know. I think it's late. I think their gun season's like in December, so I may help over to Ohio and hunt during November sometime, because I kind of got that hunting license bought already. I just got to buy the deer tag. And I don't know, maybe if I don't kill a buck this week in Wisconsin, maybe I'll buzz up there instead. Ohio's just a lot closer.
Mhm.
So, anyway, Michigan. Let's talk about Michigan now. I wanted to see what did you guys. Well, see, you guys are more familiar with Michigan than I am because Eric, I think you've hunted Michigan before, at least in the UP, and then Dan's obviously hunted Michigan,
Mhm.
and I'd driven through the place for work, but I never really spent a significant amount of time there. Um, what were your guys' like expectations up there, and were they like different than what we saw when we got up there?
For me, I mean, I didn't know really what to expect. I really went to support the Deer Hunter podcast. Kevin wanted us to go.
Yep.
He was putting it on, and we're friends with him, so we said, okay, we'll go. And I kind of expected it to be more rugged, big woods. I thought it had bigger hills. It really didn't seem that hilly to me. Everybody described it to me as part hill country. I didn't see that. But it was pretty different from one end to the other. On one side where we hunted, it was more wooded and broken up by roads intensely. I mean, you couldn't walk a quarter mile without hitting a road on the one end. And on the other end, you could get back a couple miles in some spots.
Yeah.
I was really amazed by the amount of elk and the amount of elk stein. And trying to differ that from whitetail sign was harder than I thought. A lot of the elk seem to the small elk seem to rub trees like big bucks do, which in the same height range. But I just got to keep reminding myself there are no bucks that big in Michigan.
Yeah. Not where we were at. Yeah. Kevin Leach from Latitude, he shot like what was it, Dan? Maybe a 70-inch 6-pointer, 65, 70-inch 6-pointer.
70 inches.
Yeah,
and it was a 2-year-old too. I mean, that same buck here would probably be pushing, 100 to 115 inches.
Yeah, and
maybe
that's
even
what
bigger.
I asked a couple people that were from around there. I said, like, what's that compared to? And he was like, oh, it'd be like if you shot like a 140 in Kansas or something. That's a nice deer, around here. So if that tells you the deer hunting Cajuns, like a 130 or 140 would be a huge buck up there.
And Kevin got an even bigger one. It's just that we didn't get to see it because he didn't track it until we left.
Yeah, Kevin from the Deer Hunter podcast got a Saturday night. He killed a nice buck.
Yeah, did you guys hear the latest on that? Did he end up going back out Sunday morning and finding that?
Yes,
he did.
Yes,
yeah, and
it was right where he left off.
Yeah, it wasn't very far from where he found it right away, essentially.
And it was bigger than the 6-pointer. It had brows.
Okay, that's good to hear. Good for him.
Yeah. What about you, Eric?
I take that back. It was also a 6-pointer, but it had brows.
Right. Kevin's didn't have. Okay. Kevin Leach from Latitude. His didn't have brows, and then.
Right.
Kevin from the Deer Hunter podcast.
The other Kevin had brows, but he didn't have the G3s or whatever.
He's a clean 6.
Yeah. Yeah. So as far as terrain base in Michigan, where we were, as you had mentioned, Josh, I'm used to hunting in the UP. So I had imagined when we went to northern lower Michigan, I expected the terrain to be essentially the same. So there's a lot of big swamp in UP. And the forest that I hunt is a little more coniferous with pines and cedars, with creeks running through them. So that was kind of the terrain that I expected to come across. But, once we started doing a little exploring by truck, cutting tracks and stopping on roads and trying to figure out where deer are bedding, it was pretty surprising to me. As much as we had scouted, I mean, we put a lot of miles on last week. We probably put between 15 and 20 miles on, and a lot of the walking we did, we thought we would be getting close to some bedding, and as you moved your way on, it just got to be open terrain and more open terrain. So a lot of that big woods was kind of laid out that way. So it was kind of tough to figure out where bedding was in that certain terrain anyway. Now, of course, once we started pushing in the swamps a little bit, now we started to get on to deer a little more. But that was my expectation going in, was to have somewhat similar terrain to the UP, where I'm used to. So,
how much different is where we were at in Michigan to like northern Wisconsin, or is it kind of similar terrain and all that?
it kind of depends where you go in the state. It can differ from mass hardwoods to swamp to you have your conifer forests. So it really depends where you are. I would say it's pretty similar for the most part. I just felt that northern lower Michigan, it just seemed like a lot more open terrain than what I'm used to. So
yeah, I saw that too. I think it was because of the sandy soil. A lot of places, you get out in the woods and there'd be like areas void of trees.
Yeah,
everything here is just thick.
The ferns. I mean, how many ferns did we see? I mean, I'm not saying to put a number on it, but the forest floors were just covered in ferns. A lot of the places we looked, which doesn't hold good deer habitat. There's not browse, there's not bedding in that stuff. You may occasionally kick a doe or something out of some of those ferns, but that's what kind of made it tough in that specific terrain that we were doing some scouting in. So,
yeah, the thing that got me was, I didn't really have much of an expectation, I would say, like the terrain features wise. I mean, I studied maps a whole bunch, but I really had no idea what I was going to get into as far as what it would look like up there. But I thought we would see a lot more deer than what we did. There just wasn't that many deer running around.
I didn't see a deer the whole trip.
Yeah.
Well, not while hunting.
Right, yeah, while hunting.
Which I thought I'd get on them right away. I thought that would be a piece of cake to get on deer. I thought, maybe getting a big buck might be hard, but I'd get on deer pretty quick, I thought.
Yeah. Did you think that just because of your experience in Michigan when you were on the Public Land Challenge and how many deer you guys were seeing there?
I just always heard they have good quantities of deer up there, and
yeah,
I just thought if I could get in, find the pockets of deer, because I know big woods is usually pockets of deer. You drive through,
right.
You walk through or look at a lot of areas that don't have deer, and you got to find the concentrations of them in big woods because they're where the food is.
Yeah,
and we found the food pretty quick. We found oaks. They were dropping acorns at one particular elevation, and the higher elevations didn't have acorns anymore.
Yeah,
but the whole oaks were dropping. So one area that was at a certain elevation had white oaks dropping, and had a huge concentration of deer. But finding the deer didn't necessarily mean you're going to kill them. And I'm used to deer in early season moving very short distances to food, so you think they're right there. And setting up, that obviously wasn't the case, because set up on both in the swamp and in the oaks area, relatively close to the food sources, and the deer were not getting there in daylight. However, in the oaks, friends of ours were taking pictures of pretty good sized bucks out eating in open sunlight, and so I kind of expected them to just move to those oaks pretty early, especially if they're in a little cover. And in the oak area, it took narrowing it down and finding, we're trying to look for those pockets of terrain that you'd expect bucks to be, like a hard transition of thick. We'd find a swamp on the map, and it'd be hard to see what kind of swamp it is. And you go navigate it, and it would be so open, you'd be like, nothing with any kind of pride would bed here, and you just kept looking, and it kept being more and more the same. And what we found there in that wooded section was that the stem count was real important. So where it was real heavy, we had a lot of small trees growing in thick. That's where those deer were. But we got into that pretty much in the last day. And my struggle was that we started in swamp, then we went over there, and then we went back to swamp. And the reason we did that is when we went over there, we had heard about some big deer over there, went there, found a whole bunch of sign, got excited, spent a whole day scouting over there. And we were going to hunt around where this big buck was seen and photographed, right? And when we came out of the from scouting a whole day, 2 different groups had driven around our trucks, parked campers and horse trailers, and got out and started horse riding and camping there, right where we were going to hunt. Because I guess you can camp anywhere you want in that forest.
Yeah.
So my point is that we moved back and forth in those 2 areas. When you're hunting for 4 days, it takes some focus on an area to really understand it. And I think we divided our focus a little too much. By the time we figured them out where the oak trees were, it was the last day, and Erik really got one good sit on that. And when we started figuring out where they were in the swamps, it was like right at the end there. And then you got like 2 good sits on that. And it was just, if we would have focused one way or the other, I think we may have done better. Maybe not, but that's the way I feel.
Yeah, I would agree with you. Because, I mean, and also something else is like our 2 areas we were focusing on were like, what, an hour and 15-minute drive apart?
Yeah.
Probably. So it was like, you'd spend so much time traveling to, and the one spot was an hour from camp.
And the guys who were successful were walking over the hill from camp, right? Or basically right down the street or something.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Right.
they didn't spend hours driving.
Right. And then that, while you guys hunted that last evening on the oaks, and I guess something else to like talk about was like oaks weren't falling really good. Like we found a good pocket of them, but not every white oak had acorns out there. The majority of them didn't. So that was a little bit of a.
It was at one elevation. All the ones that we found that weren't dropping were just a little bit higher.
Yeah. All the low ones were. Seemed to.
It was interesting too. I don't know if you noticed, but did you see how small the acorns were? They were tiny.
The white oaks were small.
A lot of them were pretty small. I noticed that as well.
In comparison to what we have for acorns here, I don't know if it was just like a bad year, or if that's the way it is up in that sandy soil or something.
I bet it's the soil they have up there. I don't know that for sure.
Get onto one spot where I found multiple big buck tracks going across the road in an obvious place, and there was tons of other deer, but at least 3 or 4 sets from big bucks.
Yeah.
Going across a dirt road and heading in. And when you look from that dirt road, you could see a white oak back in the brush. And I went to that white oak, and there was piles of feces and rubs and all kinds of sign and heavy trails coming to it. And my focus went onto that spot to kill. And that was for our last day, I think. And we were going to go in there and kill that buck. And then we went and searched a whole bunch of other spots, started to focus on that thicker stuff. Then Erik found his spot in that thick stuff. And then we went back, and I was going to just go in and figure out what tree to put a stand in over there. And we got just a little further, and there's a gut pile.
Yeah.
So that obvious spot there, somebody else had found it too. That kind of threw a wrench in things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it didn't seem like
you really dove in deep, and you might not have had the numbers like in the area where I was looking.
Right.
But you didn't have all that competition. You didn't have all those wrenches thrown into it, and you could read the terrain easier. It was really hard to read what was going on where I was, where I focused the last couple of days there. But where you were, you could read a swamp, you could read islands, you could read points and stuff, and that's what you focused on. Mm-hmm. And honestly, if I'd have kept with the game plan, both me and Erik and you, all 3 of us, were kind of shocked when we all picked that area and the same spots in that area, unbeknownst to each other.
Yeah.
We compared notes, we all had points on the same spots, 16 miles from camp.
Right.
It was pretty amazing.
It was
that's the area where you started getting into the stuff. But my
Yeah.
God, you were walking 0.8 of a mile, 1.2 miles on one of the hunts.
Yeah, I killed my doe about a mile back, which we found a little better way of getting in and out of there. So it was a little shorter than that, but it was still a long walk.
What better do you got to do at night there, right?
That's right. You might as well just be dragging the doe out of the dark swamps.
Josh, I just have to mention this really quick. How funny was it when you and I were dragging your doe, and
let's tell that story. Let's tell that story after I tell how I shot my doe.
Okay.
So essentially Erik and Dan we scouted the day I shot my doe, which was on a Friday night. Yes, Friday night. We scouted all day Friday, and we kind of found two good spots to set up. And Dan and Erik took those two good spots, and I just took my stand on my back. Yeah. I took my stand on my back and just headed. I'm gonna go to this swamp. It's about a mile walk, and I just had a lot of confidence in going in there. I like doing that anyway. It's one of my favorite ways of hunting when I'm out of state. And anyway, so I crawled back in there, which literally crawled in some places. And there was a really good point in a swamp that's like, and you guys are better at describing swamps than I am, but it was like a grassy cattail type swamp. That's how there was like
tag. It had a spotty tag in it too.
Yeah.
Marsh grass.
There you go. Whatever, you northern people. And there's a really good point, and there was a whole bunch of trails that would come into that point. And I saw that there was good rubs on that point as well. I scouted one other point; it didn't look as good, so I kind of circled back to this point and got set up. And I was in a perfect tree. It was like, I had cover all around me. There's no way a deer could see me. And then, I don't know, maybe 30 minutes before dark, 4 does appeared in the swamp, and a single big one kind of took a left and went to my left, and then the 3 other ones went to my right. And as soon as those 3 other ones went to my right, they got into the woods out of the swamp, and that big doe that went to the left ended up cutting the corner, and then she walked right by me at like 22 yards, and that's when I killed her. And it worked out, real good. And I often have some wonders about what would have came in after that, because there was some decent rubs back in there. But it was, I wasn't going to pass up a doe at that point. I had a doe tag and 2 buck tags, and I was going to fill one of them. So, but yeah, that's how I ended up killing my doe. She only ran, 40 yards and ended up dying right there. So it worked out real nice. And then Erik and Dan ended up finding me, regardless of no cell phone service. I got on the horn with Erik and told him where I was, and they walked pretty much right to me. So that worked out good without a map or anything. But yeah, on the way out, you want to tell the story, Erik?
Yeah. So on the way out, Josh and I were dragging the doe, and Dan had cut a stick for us to put on a single rope. So that way it allows 2 different guys to drag the sled. And sometimes the rope would pull over to one side and make it harder for one guy to pull, versus the other guy. And I thought at one point, boy, this deer, it's just dragging itself. And I'm like, gosh, do you have all the weight, or what's happening? And then we got a little.
I remember Josh saying something like, "We're going downhill. It's light for me too."
That's kind of when
but it was the easiest drag you could ever imagine.
Literally, just imagine the easiest thing.
60 yards like that, Josh, before we realized she fell out of the sled.
Yeah. It was easy for me, and I wasn't going to say anything. And it was easy for you, and you you didn't say anything, and we ended up walking for a while.
That's when I realized that if you guys don't even know if the doe is in her or not, I could just sit on that doe and take a nap and take a bite out. So I traveled her. You guys just pulled me out.
You know what, though? It's those little stories like that make the hunt, right? I mean, we didn't come away with a buck, but it's those little stories that we can say in the future, we can say, hey, remember this one time when,
Yeah.
well, that's great stuff to talk about. I mean, it's a laugh.
Yeah, I'm glad it happened. I'm glad it wasn't more than whatever 50 or 60 yards. But
Yeah, right. After 60 yards, it gets embarrassing.
Yeah, it's like this is inconvenient. That was just whatever. We'd already drug her for a mile. Might as well drag her for. Yeah, that was funny.
Yeah,
I just remember hearing Dan go as we were walking back. He's like, "Jesus Christ, guys!" That's all I remember. That's all I heard him say.
He did say that.
Sorry.
Oh, it was funny.
Oh, that's
Oh
funny.
no, we were laughing. Oh, that's funny. But yeah, we got her back to camp, and then the next day, I kind of dealt with her, and you guys went scouting again, and that's whenever you guys got a little better handle on the spot that had the acorns.
Yeah, and you just dove in deep then. Before we get into that, what was interesting with those elk is we were walking around next to the elk viewing area scouting, which is where me and Erik ended up hunting the last couple of days.
Mm-hmm.
But there was a lot of traffic and a lot of focus on that from local people.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of deer signs. So we knew there was deer there, and it was just a matter of like, in my mind, well, all I have to do is out hunt everybody else. Those deer are there. They're living under their noses. You just, it's no different than hunting back home.
Right.
So when we were scouting that, we came around a corner and you spotted something. It's like you ran ahead of me. I was walking in the front. You ran ahead of me, walked around the corner, and
You're lying.
Just as I looked down and saw the shed, you yelled, "Shed!" What'd you find?
Yeah, we found an elk shed there right outside not too far off the field edge.
And what was interesting is it was completely unchewed.
Yeah, it was rather from this spring when it fell. When he dropped it.
One of the local people was telling me, I told him, I can't believe nobody looked there for a shed. Mm-hmm. And he said those, the smaller elks, which that was a small, medium-sized one, right?
Yeah, it was like a 5-point bull.
Yeah. They dropped their sheds later and people have already quit looking.
Oh.
In a lot of cases is what he said. What's funny about that is that same day later on, once we ran into those horse people that moved in on our area, we ran all the way across the whole area to a whole another place an hour away and dove in. We each dove in deep into the swamp. And I think we kind of went in blind that day. From sign that was out near the road, we went way back in and figured out spots on the map. And where I went, there was absolutely nothing. It was a ghost town of deer tracks. And I was going to try and make a break for the truck and maybe get in someplace behind the cutover or something and just try to save the day. Mm-hmm. And I ran into a giant elk shed.
Yep.
It was off of a really big bull. Yeah, a little chewed up, but it's funny because I was looking at my phone, mapping my way out, and I stopped and I'm staring at the screen, and in the background, right at my feet, I can see this shed. And it's right where me and Erik had walked through there.
Yeah, so it was a real dark shed too, so you could mistake it as a log or something. Yeah, correct. A log. That thing would be more of like a log.
So I strapped that to my backpack or to my tree stand, and I took it to the truck and I hid it in the truck. And I didn't tell these guys nothing, I'll wait till we were to camp, and then I let Erik know, and I told him to distract Josh and get him to tell everybody about his shed. And we had Josh telling everybody about his shed he found, and I hid that thing behind my back, and I walk up and I go, "You call that a shed?" And I pulled out the monster.
It was a big shed.
You outdid me anyways, because then you found a whitetail shed too. So.
Yeah, I got him here. A picture of him. Kevin sent me a bunch of pictures, not a bunch, a few pictures from the week. He's really talented with a
camera, yeah.
With a camera, yeah. Here you go. You can see there's the sheds we found. There's a pretty nice whitetail shed I found, actually. It's pretty funny. Kevin's like, he goes, "Man, you've been here for 3 days and you found more sheds than I have my entire life out here." So he's like, "If you find one more, you're tied with me." So yeah, you can see there. Dan's is all chewed up, but I like mine better. It's all nice, and I can decorate with it here in the house and stuff. But yeah, it was cool though. And I was gonna say, let's stop sharing my screen here. Something that kind of threw me off is the amount of elk. Like I did not expect that at all. I didn't even think about elk, to be honest with you, up there. Someone mentioned like, oh, there's some elk up there, and I was thinking, okay, yeah, there's probably a few here and there. Probably won't even see signs of them.
I expected it elk to be like they are in Wisconsin, where it's rare to see one, but you'll see the tracks.
Yeah,
right.
The sign up there from elk was incredible. Everywhere you look, there's trees torn apart, and it was insane.
Yeah, I was telling Kevin we did a little podcast while we were up there. I was like, it's a kind of a burden to have them around. Like they leave too much sign. Like it's just there's stuff everywhere, and especially if you're like if you were a new hunter trying to go up there and kill a whitetail or something, like it'd be confusing as heck for people. Even us sometimes were hard. It was like, is this deer sign or is this elk sign, or especially like the cow scat on the ground and stuff. Sometimes it looked like deer scat, and but I mean it was kind of cool having them around, but I could see how it'd get frustrating.
And the rubs were pretty questionable at some points as well.
Yeah.
So, it was amazing that they rubbed so low on a tree.
Mm-hmm.
It's such a big animal. They weren't all like that, but it seemed like the smaller elk rubbed real low. What would give them away was the tines would be broken off, or the little branches would be broken off and scarred into the tree higher than you could reach. And you're like, yeah, I don't think a whitetail did that.
Yeah.
Yeah. You'd have rubs at a foot off the ground and then all the way up to 8 feet off the ground. There'd be stuff broken off and whatnot. It's crazy. Yeah. That last day, I don't think I ever told you guys this, but I went to town and get some ice in the cooler, and then on the way back, I was traveling through some of the hill country. It's very minimal hill country, but I stopped in there, and I'm like, I'm going to just go up on this ridge and see what's going on up there. And it was kind of a ghost town up in the hills. It seemed like there's quite a few white oaks and not a single. I never saw one acorn on the ground. It was all dried up or old acorns. So, yeah, I was kind of hoping to get into a little honey hole as I was driving in. But then, yeah, that last sit, you guys were, sitting where you sat at, and I found a private crop field, and there's not a lot of crop fields up there, and it was a cornfield. And I thought, I'm just going to look at that cornfield, and then I'm going to pick the best bedding area I could find, not too far from that cornfield. And it was far. I ended up having to walk like a mile and a quarter to get to it. But there was a remote swamp back in there. And when I got in there, I thought this looks like the best point on the island for the wind I had that evening. And there was some giant whitetail rubs. I didn't see any signs of elk there. Giant. I mean, there was giant from around there. They were waist high. They were nice ones. And then there was 2 great big beds. One was like farther in the mouth of the point, and then there was one at the very end of the point. And he wasn't laying there when I went in. The beds weren't. They were worn down, but they weren't warm or anything. It's not like I just jumped him up. I ended up sitting there that evening, and as I was putting my camera away and like lowering my stuff down, big deer walked down the trail like 20 yards, the one I set up on, but I couldn't tell what it was. The grass was taller, and with the low light I couldn't really see. But something came in that evening that looked very would have been really interesting if it came in earlier, but it was too late anyway. And and that spot ended up being, I didn't know this at the time, but it was the same area where Kevin shot his buck earlier. Kevin from Latitude Outdoors, he shot that 6-pointer, but he was sitting up close to the crop field. He wasn't very far off the private crop field where he shot his.
I thought he was closer to camp. Now I kind of remember him talking about that now.
Yeah, it's pretty close to camp, Dan. It's only like maybe 2 miles from camp, the drive, 2 or 3 miles.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we would go eat. We'd go eat breakfast. It was on that one of those roads we take right there, so it wasn't that far from camp. It just took me a long time to get back to the truck because I walked so far back in there. Is the only reason I got back late. But that was a good set. I felt pretty confident when I was sitting up there that I was going to see something. But
so that's the thing. I mean, on a 4-day hunt in a place we've never been before, and I think some of those other guys have been there before. Like Kevin for sure, because our host, because that's his area. That's why he invited us. But when we go there blind, never having been there before and wanted to, explore and figure things out for ourselves, by the time you get on them in 4 days, it's time to go home.
Yeah.
You were just getting into the deer. I was just getting into the deer. Erik was just getting into the deer, and then it's time to go home.
Yeah. Erik, you had a good last set. You saw a bunch of deer.
Yeah, I saw quite a few. I kicked one up on my way in, and shortly after that, it would have been an hour I was sitting or so. I saw 3 of them leave what I assumed to be their bedding area. And then another while later, I saw 4 more get out. And then I had 2 come in pretty close within 30 yards of me. And the doe, it looked like she spotted me a little bit. Didn't fall, so I know she didn't scent me, but she turned around and kind of walked away. So I don't know if I was a little bit skylit, what it was, but something didn't feel right for her. So, but I probably ended up seeing, I think it was like 10 doe that evening. So
yeah, that seems like a lot of deer,
That's another thing is I saw they had an abnormally skewed population. There was a lot of does per buck.
And that was
deer crossing the road, there'd be like 10 does of 1 buck or something,
Yeah, that was something I was just going to mention. I don't remember who we were talking to. I think it was Kevin with Deer Hunter Podcast. He said the buck to doe ratio is like 20 to 1.
And it's surprising because they give away unlimited doe tags, I think. You just buy them over the counter as many as you want. I think.
Right.
$20.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know what it is for a resident
too. It's just $20.
$20, yeah. All you want. Well, I think you could buy 10. I think you get up to 10, which that's a lot. I mean, you just got to buy.
That's pretty much all you want. Yeah.
Right. And the $2. But yeah, I don't know. I had a good time though. It was fun I never hunted like kind of that type of terrain, so it was a good experience, I thought.
Every time you do a hunt like that, you grow.
Yeah.
You learn more, you understand more. It actually, people don't realize that, but it helps you in every terrain because you learn things about that terrain that'll help you everywhere else you go. Every time you try something different.
So I'm wondering if that buck to doe ratio might start to get better because last year, I don't want to say it was the first year ever, but last year was the first year in a long time anyway that they're allowing does to be taken with rifle. So that might change things in the future here too. That might make the ratio a little closer. Yeah.
One of them was also telling me like not that long ago you had to actually draw. You had to draw to get a doe tag.
Yeah, I started Michigan 3 or 4 years ago, so it may have been before that.
Yeah, I don't know how long ago this was either. This is the first year you had to actually call in your deer, and tag it, or call it in. You always had to tag it, but before you never had to actually call in. So I don't know. It seems like they're trying to do some different things, Michigan wise.
Yeah.
I don't know. It seems like I know Indiana back in the day used to be a $2 state and very similar to Michigan setup. And I know once, this has been 25 years ago when they changed the rules, but that seemed like a lot of people said that $1 thing really improved things around here, which I'm sure it did. It just takes a while, It's not something that just happens overnight, but
it's hard for a state to do that too because you get so much kickback from people who like shooting deer. They want to shoot one with
bow and
Yep.
And it just depends on what a guy wants, you know. I mean, it's all right to. I mean, some people like shooting two small bucks, and a bunch of does, and they're happy, and that's great. You know, you can go do that in Michigan. So, uh, I don't know what the answer is up there. I thought it was fun.
I thought, if I remember correct, Indiana's doe tags were outrageous for a non-resident too.
They're bad this year, like $280 or something like that for.
They can't expect any non-resident to buy a doe tag for that. So.
No, they also took away we used to have a late season doe where you could shoot them with a rifle, like in January. Like they added a week to season, the end of season. It was just doe only, and any weapon you wanted. They took that away this year too. So
in our state, they take away weeks. They take away prime bow hunting weeks and add rifle weeks for does.
Yeah, this was just tacked on to late bow season or whatever. You could actually still you could buck hunt. You know, you could have to use a bow though. But I don't know. Yeah. Have you guys always, Dan, had like the $2 other than your CWD era there? Have you guys always had a buck in a bow season, a buck and gun season?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. The does are way different now. I mean, when I was growing up, they didn't have doe tags. You could apply for a party permit with gun to get a doe permit for your party. In a group of 13, they'd give one to one person if you're accepted. And prior to that, there was no does allowed to be hunted. And with bow, it was either or. I mean, you could shoot a doe with your bow or a buck. So most people would hold out for a buck, obviously. But
that was probably back in the day, though, when there was not as many deer, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Way back, yeah. Because I remember, I think my dad said when he started, I think it was buck only in Indiana too. But that was, probably in the 70s.
Went up north to go to where it's deer rich, and nobody hunted in the southern part of the state. I shouldn't say nobody, but hardly anybody. And now it's just kind of flip flopped, where the southern part of the state's got all the deer, and up north ain't got crap.
Now that, Dan, you've hunted like the I don't know exactly where you guys were for the Public Land Challenge, but you're farther south than what we were, right? You were
in Michigan.
You were pretty far, yeah, in Michigan.
We were in central Michigan when we did the challenge.
Okay. Is there a pretty significant difference from where you guys were to where we were at? As far as
it was great hunting. I mean, it was. I was in deer like crazy. In the antler restriction areas, you saw some pretty good bucks. I saw some really good buck sign. I was on good bucks. And then when I got more towards the eastern side of the state and got up against the crotch, the thumb crotch or whatever you call it, I had a hunt where I had like 27 deer go by one hunt. I mean, and I think 11 of them were bucks.
Yeah.
And the biggest one was a spike. The smallest one was a spike.
Yeah.
but it was pretty crazy, the number of deer over there, and how much it was like hunting back home. I actually felt like the hunting was a little better there than it was here, with the exception of we got a little better genetics. So a 2 or 3 year old buck is a little bigger here than there, but getting on them, it wasn't that difficult over there. But at the same time, while we were hunting, they had record flooding over there. And when we were looking at swamps and stuff, the swamps flooded and all the deer were on the limited high ground that was left. And so it was pretty game rich, probably a little more than usual. So maybe I saw a skewed version.
You mentioned antler point restrictions. I was going to ask you, what are your thoughts on those, and do you think they work for states?
Well, it's kind of crazy to me that a 3-point restriction on one antler could work, but I guess if everything spikes and people are shooting them, it would. I do think restrictions can help. I know I didn't like it too much when they had the CWD thing going on and they're giving tags to shoot any deer because I just felt there was a safety issue there. I like the fact when a hunter has to actually identify what he's shooting, like it has to fall within a certain range. You know what I'm saying? I'm not saying it's good or it's bad or whatever, but if all you have to do is see brown and shoot it, that doesn't make things too safe. Um, but if it has to have 3 points or it has to have a fork, that's a lot safer. However, I do think antler restrictions work. What I don't like about them is you can have an awfully big genetic freak that doesn't have the tines. Like I can remember when I was young having seeing a 4-pointer that had like Coke can bases, and it was like 20 inches wide, and all it was a big fork.
Yeah.
It'd be a shame not to be able to hunt and shoot a 5 or 6 year old deer like that.
Yeah.
You know, I've seen 6-pointers go into 130s. Oh, 130-inch 6 is gigantic.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it would be a shame not to be able to shoot something that and let it go around breeding.
Right.
But that's where it has its downfalls, but it does generally help with the age class. It does help get bucks at older age class. I think education would help more. I think in a lot of cases, if you can get through to the public about what they're shooting and why they should hold out, it might help more. But some guys just have to shoot something, I guess. I once hunted in Illinois at Panther Creek public land. And man, there was giant bucks running all over the place. I almost shot a booner on that hunt. I came really, really close. And what they had going was there wasn't any rules like antler restriction rules, but you had to go meet the biologist in order to hunt there. You had to go talk to them. I don't know if they still do this. This is a long time ago. But the biologist would lay out antlers and he'd say, well, this is the age classes, and we'd really prefer you shoot these and above. And if you've never shot a deer before and you want to shoot one smaller, okay, but really this is what we're looking for. If you're an advanced hunter who shot a deer or two, look at shooting something like this, because we're trying to grow bigger animals. Nobody wants to shoot babies. They want to shoot mature animals. So if you shot a deer, you had to take it back to that guy and register it, which would be pretty embarrassing, if you shot a little dink. So I thought that seemed to work really well at that place, where they didn't restrict it where a kid or something couldn't shoot one, or where it's always like some sort of lock solid law or something, where
Yeah. Right. Yeah. I just don't like the fact that the kind of the government telling you how you can hunt and all that stuff. That's the only thing that kind of bothers me about them.
Yeah, there's people that hunt for meat, and people with where their religion tells them not to hunt bigger animals for pride, like for showing off.
Yep.
I don't see anything wrong with that, but the law is kind of funny that way. I do think too, it's always been ironic to me, all these guys that preach you should shoot bucks like me, because then we'd all have bucks like the ones I shoot to shoot. Well, then your bucks wouldn't mean nothing. The reason that the trophy you shot the other day is a great accomplishment is because there's not a lot of them around.
Mm-hmm.
If you managed it so that those were really common, well, then you just have to raise your stakes higher.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I'm just saying that really you should just worry about number one, worry about yourself. And if it's hard to kill a buck like that, that just makes it more of a challenge and is what it is.
Yeah, that's so true. Yeah, if every place was like Iowa, who cares about a 150? It's like, every place would have that stigma of you better shoot a 150 every year, and what's the fun? What's the fun in that? So that's a good point too. No, Michigan's cool. I'm glad it exists. It's I'd never been a part of a deer camp like that either, really. Like a Michigan traditional deer camp. with that many guys and whatnot. So got to try out our new tent too. That was pretty sweet, huh?
That was a cool setup.
What was great is it was up when I got there. I didn't have to do any work.
Yeah.
And I just drank monsters and sat around while you guys took it down. It was great.
We were zipping up the zipper on the bag, and Dan's like, "Oh, you guys need any help?" No, I got a white duck. It's called a white duck wall tent. It's like a 12 by 14. It's pretty nice. What was it, like maybe 30 at night up there?
Yeah, the trick was to just stack as much wood as you could into that what do you call that furnace thing?
That wood stove.
Wood stove. Yeah.
Why? What happened
with hard oak as tight as you can get it, and then you lock up all the windows. You zip down the door, and then you roll up in your blankets and get warm.
Yeah, Dan couldn't make up his mind in there. We got in there and it was cold, and he's like, "Golly, get this thing so I'm sweating. I want to be sweating, laying in my sweat." And I'm like, "Oh God!" Then we got her up to about 120 in there.
Yeah.
And then Dan's like, "Jesus, guys, it's too hot in here. Open the windows."
The windows were open. The door was open. But what's funny about that is then by the time it started to cool down, we all fell asleep.
Yeah.
And, I had woken up and it must have been, it was whatever the temperature was outside. So
like
now
33,
now it's 30 degrees inside of the tent and we're shivering, and then we stoked the wood back up and that was funny too.
The worst part is, with three guys in there, when it would get cold, all of a sudden you'd hear a squeak and then you'd get hit by a warm blast of air and the furnace ain't on. And you're like, oh man, Erik's farting again. I would fart all night long.
What did you say, Dan, with the hot and cold temperatures? You were saying something about our stuff rusting inside of the tent.
Yeah.
As much as that temperature swing was.
That was crazy.
Dude, it had to be over.
There had to be steam coming off of that tent. All the other guys sleeping in their cars and stuff around us had to be like wondering what was going on.
That first time we fired that thing up the chimney looked like a tractor pull going on in there, just blowing smoke up the throwing flames out of the top
you didn't
of
get
it.
the screen on it either. And then
I know
I'm outside and all of a sudden I see all these like hot ashes with flames off and landing on top of the tent. I'm like, I don't think that should be happening.
What's funny is we knew we forgot to put the screen on the first day. We never put it on.
No. We also, it was it was, I shouldn't say that, but we didn't put it on then because we had the pipe hot. We had already started the fire, so we couldn't touch it,
Yeah.
We don't really have an excuse the next day. We could have probably taken it off and putting it on, but we kept her calmed down a little bit so it wasn't blowing sparks off that's the first thing when Jason came to camp. He's like, "Oh, you should probably get a spark arrestor for that thing." He's like, "You'll put holes in your tent." And I'm like, "Yeah, I know. I got one. We just didn't put it on."
Yeah. Jason came up and actually took time out of his schedule to help you with that dough, didn't he?
Yeah. He lives about an hour from where we were at. Jason Simkowiak of the Traditional Bow Hunter and Wilderness Podcast. He came up there and we butchered the dough, and he was on the pod. Him and Kevin did the podcast together. That's who the three. Kevin did a bunch of podcasts with like just groups of people, and that was our couple people there we had on. So yeah. Shout out to him for helping out with that. He's also like he's packed out a lot of deer, and I've only packed out a couple. So it was cool to like see his method of taking a deer down to get it into a packable, like you put it in a pack or something. He did it a little different than I'd been doing it, and his way was definitely better. So it was actually a pretty good learning experience for me. I've cut up probably a couple hundred, on hanging them up and cutting them up, but only a couple laying on the ground. So, yeah, it was a good time though. Anyway, you guys want to talk anything else about Michigan? We've been on here for an hour now, so I thought we would get into some questions.
Take the questions.
Okay, here we go. Let's see here. Zeke Outdoors, he said he may be sleeping, but he asked it early here. at what age do bucks start following mature style patterns? He says, I see a lot of 2.5-year-olds and some 3.5, and they are all over the place.
Yeah, that's a hard question. I guess deer like people. I mean, you got some that are immature and some that are mature. I mean, I've been on cushy managed properties, like, and seen 5-year-olds act like you wouldn't see a fawn act like on public. Maybe that's a little bit of an exaggeration, but like you wouldn't see a 1.5-year-old act. And I guess there's every variation in between. And I think that the variations are probably based on life experiences, right?
Yeah.
Because otherwise, why would it be so much different, right? From public to private to managed, I think it has to do with the pressure that's on them. They can get pretty smart at 2 in some places, that's for sure. When I look at most of the mature bucks I've taken on public land, when you look them over close, you find projectiles in them, you find wounds in them, you see where there's arrow holes through their ears and crap. Those deer live a rough life, and they learn some valuable experiences. So it varies greatly from deer to deer, I think.
That's a good answer. Okay, here is another one from Alex. He's from East Wisconsin hunter. He's having 2 to 4 bucks coming and hitting scrapes and doing light sparring in the food plots. Is it common for bucks to still be on their bachelor group early in October?
I wouldn't say that that's common. That they might just be traveling together near each other, but they should be probably start to get pretty ornery towards each other pretty quick here. But I'll see groups of bucks come out occasionally together, all the way up until, probably mid or late October when they start getting more serious about breeding. I had 2 decent bucks come out together yesterday. I mean, they do that.
Yeah, I pretty regularly, like he's talking about in food plots. Like I have 2 food plots, and there's pretty regularly multiple bucks in the food plot.
Yeah, I don't think they actually bed right together, maybe in the same area near each other, but it's not like they're bedding together like in a bachelor group, right?
Right. No, I don't think so either. And like he said, they're kind of acting ornery usually too. They're usually like not okay with each other being there. They're doing some sparring, running each other around, that kind of thing. But I know last year, like on the 2nd of October, I had 3 bucks come out of the same bedding area though, and 2 of them were nice ones. 2 of them were pretty good bucks. So it probably just depends.
Mm-hmm.
It probably depends on the personality of the bucks too. I'd say the ones that want to be alone are probably alone, and the ones that are a little more comfortable stick together or something. I don't know.
You have a wide variety of deer actions, throughout the season. Like you some rut activity outside of rut. That spot where me and Erik were hunting in the last video, where he passed the spike. I went back up in there, and on October 1st, I had a big buck chasing a doe. On October 1st, a lone mature doe with no fawn. He was chasing her on October 1st. Hard.
Yeah.
I thought that was pretty interesting, but you see stuff like that every now and then.
Okay, we got a call in here. Oh, I forgot to, my wife and my boy are coming to the Battle of the Bows too. They're going to be our camp host. So Maddie put on here. I know Maddie put on here. Don't forget
Maddie.
Maddie and Huck are going. So
Maddie, the one who straightened you out on that?
Yeah, she was.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm just now reading through the comments, so I got real deep in our conversations here, so I'm way behind. But all right, we got a call in. This will allow me to get caught up on comments here. So,
what's up, guys?
Hey, Jacob.
Hey, what's up?
You guys are gonna have to excuse me. I'm really sick. My voice is kind of going here, so if my voice cracks, try not to laugh too hard here.
You're good.
Dan, Eric, Josh, when you guys are going to a new place, you're doing a challenge like this, you're usually getting on them towards the end of it. So I assume you're kind of going in and breaking down as much as you can until you start finding fresh sign, and then you're using that sign in association at bedding and working deeper. Are you I know there's a point in which you determine that you're close enough to bedding that you want to set up, but once you've done one of those setups, are you kind of discounting that area as you've intruded on it, that deer wasn't in there for that day? Or do you stage hunt it where you're starting to see what you like and then you hunt it maybe the furthest back variation and then the next day you're working in closer and closer? So are you getting on the last day because you've eliminated so many areas and now you're on the last one that's the most promising? Or are you on it because you've worked deepest into the area and now you're where the deer are truly at in it?
So there's probably a great variation to the answer to that. I think my first answer would be I would try to dive in and hit the right spot the first time and the area's burned. But a lot of times you misread it because you haven't been there before and you don't go in deep enough. You've seen nothing and you know those deer are there somewhere and you just try to relocate them and you keep moving. And that's how we progressively got onto better sign. But technically you try to dive in and hit it right the first time and then just move on to the next spot if it doesn't work. At least that's my take on it. How about you, Josh?
When I'm out of state, like on an out of state trip, I'm probably overly aggressive. I don't think I'm over aggressive. I may be overly aggressive to some people, but I push my limits because like on these like 4-day trips, sometimes doing an observation sit or not pushing in, like you could do an observation sit where you're not going to booger up anything, but like if you're just setting back on the trail farther than you think you should, like that deer's probably going to get there eventually and smell you, and then the odds of seeing him the next day probably go down quite a bit. So I always push my limits, and it's hard for me to tell you like how I know where I'm at as far as my limits go. It's like you just got to read the sign, read the terrain. But yeah, I'll be on Onyx. Like, okay, I think this buck's bedding here, and I'll mark off like 100-yard section, and like, okay, this is I'm going to try to get to this, or 70 yards, 50, just depending on the terrain and how much cover is there. But
and honestly, the spot where you killed that doe, you read that better than I did. There was so much sign around this logging road, and it didn't look like very many people were getting in there. I thought those deer couldn't be coming from far. We're on swamp edge, so I just moved back into where they were, looked like they're staging into what we were looking at. And me and Eric set up like that, and we saw nothing. But when we dove into where you wanted to start at, then you started seeing deer. So there's different ways to read it, and I might have been right, but in that case, I was wrong, and Josh was right. But that doesn't mean it's going to be that way the next time.
Right.
It's just I do agree totally that you got to push that envelope on a 4-day hunt. You have to try and hit it right the first hunt that you go in. I mean, you got 4 days to get it done. You ain't going to do it by doing observation sits and stuff. If I sit in a position to see something, it's also going to be a kill position on 4-day hunt. What was your thoughts on that, Eric? That's an interesting question.
I really agreed with what Josh said as far as, on a 4-day hunt, you have to go in and you have to be aggressive. And Josh made a good point about if you're sitting far back, that buck has a chance to come out and pick up on your scent trail. Now, I think if you push the envelope, if you're being smart about wind and entering that bedding area, even if he hears something, if he just catches a glimpse of you and he's out of there, you still have a shot to get back in there that next night, and get right after him. There's a chance that he could be there as long as he didn't scent you. And I think that's where it really pays off, where you have to be aggressive. So
yeah, look at my buck I killed in Nebraska. I mean, that's exactly what happened. Exactly. I mean, right. He didn't scent me. I had the only reason I went in there is because the wind was blowing right in my face away from him. But he saw me, he heard me or whatever he did, but that wasn't enough to keep him from coming back in there the next evening.
Yeah, that's what happened with Jake Bush, like his 186 or whatever the heck he killed in Ohio. That's how he did. He saw a sign at the last second and decided he wasn't out enough deer and bumped it and came back on the same wind and killed it. Do you have time for one more small one? Because Erik touched on something that I wanted to.
Yeah, go ahead, man. We're good. We don't have anybody else calling in right now, so.
Okay. Yeah, Erik, like you said, going in with the wind kind of at your advantage. A lot of time where I'm here in hill country, it's like you're expecting a lot of betting on transitions that coincide with points. So like there'll oftentimes here be at 1 point, a secondary drop off, and then the actual one that the buck will be on. And I'll spend a lot of time making sure I'm not bumping the does off of this primary one.
Mm-hmm.
But I've had a lot of success on buck appearances this year when the wind was just almost blatantly terrible for me to access there without bumping something, but I had to rely on some tiny hinge of a thermal to pull it down or some small wind switch that was going to occur. If you guys are giving the deer so much of an advantage that, it would make sense for them to be there in these pressured areas, how are you kind of avoiding that access? Like, how are you knowing where you can get away with scouting if you haven't had any experience with the thermals in the area or anything like that?
For me, I'm just going to go in there and I'm going to give it a sit. And I know, Jacob, you put a lot of miles on and you do a lot of scouting. So go in and give it a sit and give it your best shot, give it your best opportunity. And you know what? If you blow it, you got another spot to hunt, right?
Yeah, that's what I did today. I totally blew all the spot.
It happens to all of us. Just get out there and just do it,
Yeah.
I mean, for me, that's my simplest answer. It's you got to take the risk,
No, that's right.
With the
hill country is pretty readable, though. I mean, once you get used to it, I mean, the thermals do what they're going to do. You in a lot of those situations, you've got to kick satellite deer out, especially in game-rich areas. And where you're at is game-rich.
Yeah.
You are not hunting where you need to hunt if you're not kicking some deer out of there. So you just do it early, get them out of there, and climb up your tree, and you try to do it where you don't surprise them too. There's actually some hunts where I actually try not to sneak too sneaky in because I know I'm going to kick deer, and if they hear you coming a little bit, they just get up and leave.
It's a lot better than
if you walk up to 10 feet from them and scare them. They run out of there blowing and screaming and take everybody with them. I'd rather they just got up and hopped off. There's times to sneak and there's times to just walk in and.
Oh my God! This took
What the heck is going on?
Is that boss again?
Yeah.
Did your boss calling?
I had an incoming phone call. Yes, I didn't expect it to shut everything down. So,
no
Josh,
worries.
you take a similar approach there. Just, I assume.
Yeah, and I think
you're aggressive.
Right. I think. I mean, that's why I have so many dang spots. Like people ask me, like, where do I hunt? And it's like that's a broad question. Like I have spots from the southern portion of Indiana to Indianapolis, that I've hunted and would feel confident hunting. So yeah, I think that's why we have so many of those spots, so you can get that, be aggressive. And more times than not, you screw it up, man. I mean, there's only a few times a year that it works out, so
I would rather screw it up and see a nice buck than not be close to seeing a nice buck at all. Like I would rather know that I scared one out of the area and at least know that he was there and I was correct than like just put myself out of position. I had this crazy thing happen these last few days that we had like really high south winds. I have a lot of like north facing points. And when you have like those ridge systems that have those 2 points and the second one is the final one that drops down, every once in a while there'll be like kind of a clearing on the beginning of that bench that leads into the next point. And I've had it where you could count like a 20-second delay where the wind would flip absolutely 180 degrees and come north. So it was like a thermal tunnel, but it was like a giant scale. Like it would be like 100 yards long. And you could count like 20 seconds. A big gust would go over your head and would hit the treetops. And then it would come the complete opposite direction of the forecasted wind. Like the wind on the tops was going completely correct. And it would be just a giant tunnel when those high winds happen. and I've seen on those days a lot of really good appearances from bucks when there is kind of that clearing, but it's met with really thick cover, because it seems to almost like dampen, if there's like gusts of wind that are like 30 miles an hour, it seems to almost dampen that wind in that area so they can still hear things like around them. But it's like a crazy tunneling effect, because there will be deer on the end of the ridge, doing normal leeward bedding, and these bucks will be able to smell above and below them so well. It's just such a giant little interesting area. It almost looks like they're bedding on the lower 1/3 of the first ridge, but they're really just catching a crazy tunnel. So that's something I've been battling this year, but it's pretty cool to learn.
All right, man. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
Good luck, man.
I'm gonna kill one tomorrow for you. So
there you go.
Be ready to head up to Wisconsin early, Josh, and drag one out.
Hey, there you go. See you, man.
Good luck, Jake.
Bye. All right, here. We got another call in here. Let's see if Mike can get in. Can you hear us, Mike?
Yeah, can you hear me?
We can.
We can hear you.
You got her figured out now, Mike. You got her figured out.
Took me a while, didn't it?
Oh, that's all good. We're here.
Just to recap a little bit of your conversation before, I don't know about where you guys were in Michigan, but for the last 2 years where I'm at in Michigan, is quite a bit west of where you were, we've had the last 2 years were hellacious crops of acorns, and this year they're pretty spotty. So I would guess that's probably what's going on over there. Usually our white acorns are pretty good size. It's no, it's the red ones that are small here, but and I don't know about the east side of the state, but on the west side of the state here, we've got some antler restrictions, and in some areas it's helping to get bigger bucks, because a lot of guys have shot the first thing that shows up just because they're afraid if they don't, somebody else will shoot it. And I mean, that's the mentality of a lot of guys.
Yeah.
So
a lot of am I wrong, Mike? But
they got one extra tag. So if you got 2 tags, they'll shoot the first deer and then they'll wait for a big one on the second one. But they'll make sure.
Well, some of them will wait for a big one on the second one. I mean, I know guys that filled tags for them, both their tags and their daughter's tags and their wife's tag, and none of the deer are big. Yeah. Okay, so it depends on the individual.
Yeah.
Right.
But to get to my question, try not to hold this program up, but I've got into this spot where I told you it's beaver dams. We've got it backed up, and I've been in there with my stand on my back, trying to find some good sign to set up on. So far, I haven't found any good sign, but I am finding beds that the deer have been there all summer. And what it's looking to me like is these are entry points where the humans are navigating this country. And now the beds obviously don't, it looks like they haven't been used in a month. I can't find a fresh hair in hardly any of them, but the bed is like wore down right to the dirt. I mean, the tufts of grass are flattened right out and there's nothing there. Would it be safe to think that now that the human activity, maybe first part of September, like I was in there on a kayak, guys are starting to scout around and they've pushed deer out of that prominent bed, but the deer is probably still somewhere close at hand?
Yeah, he's around there somewhere. I would agree.
Yeah. So another question I've got, you talk about oxbows a lot, and we got a lot of drainages in this country, and like close to home where I do a lot of hunting, we've got a lot of creeks with little tributaries that come into them. And where those tributaries connect to the bigger body of water, as long as the terrain in there is correct, would that work like an oxbow?
It could. I mean, an oxbow is an oxbow, but I mean, if it makes a narrow path to it for the deer to travel where what makes an oxbow special is that the deer knows where the danger is going to come from. That's why they like to bed there. So, I mean, if that creates like a point or a funnel of, it's the same reason they like points, right? It funnels the danger right down the point, right? So, if it works in that manner, yeah, it'll work kind of the same way.
Cool.
Hey, Dan, I'm going to ask Dan a question real quick, Mike. Can you like explain how deer use oxbows and how they set up on them?
Well, I've seen them set up both ways, where they have either the wind blowing into them and they bed up against the water and watch across the river and smell the opening. And I've seen them have the wind blowing towards the opening and they watch the opening and smell the water. And on some oxbows, they bed on both winds, and some of them they just blow with the wind blowing in them. Depends on how they lay out for beds. But you can look at the beds and see what they're doing. They're either smelling or they're watching that land bridge where the danger will come from. What ruins an oxbow is usually if there's boat traffic or kayak traffic or something on the river quite a bit. Even if it's like once every couple of weeks, I mean, that's probably too much for a deer to want to bed there. But if it's the type of creek that's all cluttered and stuff, or nobody really uses it for navigation of any sort, those are the ones that generally have the best bedding on those oxbows.
When you find these oxbows, that you got a deer camp there fairly regular, is it pretty common that there's a crossing of the river right there somewhere?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I found
escape routes through the river, and I've actually seen them go through deep water in there to bed.
Yeah, I found an oxbow brook trout fishing this year with a buck on it, and later in the season I went back. I was going to fish farther downstream from there, so I pulled into the same parking lot, and there was a big group of people camping there. And I mean, after I found it and walked back to my truck from fishing, I realized it was right by a parking spot. Mm-hmm. And then later in the season, I was back in there, and there's a huge group of people camping there, and that buck bed couldn't have been 150 yards from their camp. So yeah. He was pretty comfortable there. One more quick question, if I can. You talk about these, the buck watching the spot, like these beds I talked about at first. Are some of them beds possibly does? Because like one I found this last weekend, it was wore right down to the ground, and it's right close to a land bridge where humans are crossing, coming into this one of these islands. It was set up. It wasn't set up for the wind. The deer was obviously watching with its eyes, was watching the land bridge. But there was a branch overhanging the bed, and I just can't imagine a buck laying there and his antlers being stuck in that branch while he's watching. It seems like it'd be a problem to him. And in the past, many places like closer to home where I hunt, I call them more like a sentry bed. I know there's places where I've tried hunts different times, and I know I just don't have it quite right, so I push in a little farther, some other time, and turns out there's a doe bedded right there. And generally, it's just a single doe, and she's just in just far enough she could hear me climb up my tree or set up where I was at, but I never knew she was there, and she slips off, and I don't see anything at night. So
yeah, does bed in buck bedding areas, or like buck's bed when they're lone, or they're in very small groups like a doe and fawns. It's when they're in larger groups that they bed in like circular fashion out further and that kind of thing. They come out of my buck beds quite often. But to get more into what you're saying about that, like branch blocking where a deer's antlers could be and stuff, that's part of your detective work. I mean, you look at the beds and you see what they can do. However, I would caution you into looking at spots that just have like one bed. I think out of all the bucks I ever shot, only one came from a spot that only had one bed. Almost all buck bedding areas, not all of them, but the majority of them have multiple beds. So you might get, say, 30 beds in a acre size area, and they'll shift around from those beds. Now, some of those beds will be really worn, the ones that they use more, and be a little more obvious. But a buck seldom lays in the same spot all day. They'll get up and they'll move based on the wind shifting around and stuff, and they'll bed in different spots. And there's generally more than one buck that beds there. So like if I put a camera on a bedding area, I'll get pretty much, if it's a really good bedding area, every buck in the area will bed in their cage. Every now and then they'll show up in that bedding area. You know, I shouldn't say every buck, because some bucks might have had a bad experience there, or they don't like the way it lays out. But the majority of the bucks in the area will use that bedding area, you know, and they'll use other bedding areas. And you might have a buck there for 2-3 days, and then a different one comes in, and you might have one that comes in once or twice a week, or, you know, but there'll be time frames when they use them more. But, you know, look a little closer. There might be more beds than you're thinking.
Well, I know there's more beds, but in some of these spots, the prominent bed is wore right to the ground. So it's pretty, to me, that tells me that it's been laying there most of summer, or while the grass was trying to grow anyway, because all the grass around the bed is tall, and the tufts of grass that were in the bed are like been laid on so much they died.
Mm-hmm.
So, and yes, there are other beds, you know, a little ways down the dike, or, you know, around the same area on that knob or island that you're on. But the dominant bed that you can tell that somebody's been laying there, you know, the better part of the summer, they all seem to be in a place where they're either downwind, you know, like those summer beds. I would guess that the bed should be north of the human traffic, so they can wind them, and not all of them are. So in the one that wasn't really wore to the ground, but it was a huge bed. It was round. And there were two beds, you know, about 10 yards from each other. Both had hair in them, and one was real fresh. One had a lot of hair in it. That deer had been in that bed recently. They were not on the downwind side, but they were. If he picked his head up and looked over the ferns, he could watch that main river crossing easily.
So what do you mean by not on the downwind side? So are you saying that the wind never blows the other way?
Well, no, but most of the summertime wind is southerly.
Okay.
And I found this the main river crossing that I found in this country. I found this big round bed. What happened is I found this river crossing. I got on my kayak. I got up and poked around on the island, and I followed the main deer trails across to a land bridge that crosses the other dike. So it's not just deer traffic, it's human traffic crossing across this part of the country. And on my way back walking to the kayak, I was thinking that first little knob right off the creek during the rut, I'll bet you that bucks would bed up close on that knob somewhere watching that river crossing. And
from that knob, from that bed, they can see the river crossing?
They can see the trail coming from the river crossing. They can't see the crossing itself, but
the bed is set up perfect, because they don't wind it then.
Right.
They're either doing one thing or the other. They're either watching it or they're smelling it.
Right.
So if they can see the crossing, the wind should be coming from the other direction, because they're going to want to watch one way and smell the other. So if they're watching the crossing, the wind should be at their back. They should be smelling what's behind them
and watching the crossing.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay.
So then the wind is correct.
Gotcha.
They won't bed in a way where they're watching and smelling the same direction and leaving their back vulnerable.
Right. I know. I guess I kind of thought that they would want to be downwind so they could smell the hot does coming across that crossing, but
not necessarily. That's even like you'll hear a lot of people say that you should hunt the like downwind side of doe bedding areas. I find the upwind side being just as hot sometimes, because the bucks are checking the trails going in and out for scent. You know, a lot of things people say and people think are more myth than reality. And you just got to take a look. You got to be that detective when you look at that bed. And what's he doing here? Think a buck really wants to smell what's behind him and see what's in front of him. Now, sometimes they'll get a bed and they'll just go in something really thick or wet where you have to make noise, and it'll be a noise-based bed. You know what I mean? There's different ways they bed. But if you got any kind of open terrain, I can guarantee you he's in a spot where he can see one way and the wind is coming from another. And when they do that, they just about always put an obstacle to their back, whether it's thick cover, a downed tree, or a rock. If it's a buck, they'll have something to their back, and then they'll be able to smell the wind from back there. So if something tries creeping in from behind, they'll smell it. And if something's kind of comes creeping in front of them, they'll see it. And if you ever watched a camera on a bed and you've seen how a buck beds, there's not very long during their sleeping period that they actually have their eyes closed. Most of the time their head's up and they're watching. They'll put their head down for like 5 minutes, 15 minutes, but they don't really actually sleep very much at all.
All right, Mike. Appreciate you calling in, man.
Yep. Thanks, you guys. Keep doing what you're doing.
Thanks.
Mike.
Talk to you later, Mike. Bye. Let's do one more question from the chat. We'll get off here. We've been on here for an hour and a half. So, all right. This is from Indiana Sportsman's. He said, "Do you find areas with houses all around and human activity and sound of cars and things like that? Does wind have as much of an effect?" In my mind, I'm kind of thinking of like like housing additions and places like that, Dan.
Well, I think you should answer it. It's Indiana, and you're from Indiana.
Yeah, I don't hunt any of these places. I don't hunt any places with a bunch of houses and stuff.
You don't? Well, I do.
Here's the only thing I would assume, and this is just me, like, I don't know, watching guys like Seek One and places like that. Like I'd assume they'll tolerate all that activity in certain areas, and then once you get to a point to where you're inside the woods or in their comfort zone, they probably start paying attention to the wind.
So I hunt a lot of places that are really rural. I've got, or at least I have in the past, where you're literally right around people. And there's a spot right down the road here that's archery only that every now and then I go into. And I get in there and there's one spot where there's a good bedding area. And I got to creep in right along somebody's yard. And you feel a little creepy because you can see in their yard and see the kids playing and stuff. It feels a little weird, but you're on the public land, right? But those people are usually not around. You go out there when they're not around. But I remember being out there and their kids are out in the yard playing and stuff and running around. And a nice 8-pointer come out, walk past, can smell them. The wind's blowing right from them. Pays no attention to all the noises they're making and everything, and hits my scent trail in the woods. Just freaks, gone. You know why? Because I'm where I don't belong. They're okay with those people in those yards because that's where they belong. It's where they expect them. It's when you creep into the areas where they live, and they live in areas where people don't go. Even if it's right in the middle of these people. I mean, there's going to be, even if it's just a quarter acre, half acre, little spot where people don't go, they'll live in that little spot. And as long as you don't go in that spot, they're good with it. And then you got to creep that spot to really kill them. You got to get on the edge of it. But they will put up with those people, but they know if they catch your wind, they can pretty much smell where you're at. And they'll know if you're in that woods. They'll know whereabouts you're at, and they'll know if it's a problem. So, yeah, wind really matters in those situations. As a matter of fact, I kind of find that deer that are around people seem to have them pegged a little better. Like they seem to understand people even better, and they react to that wind even harder. I get up in the north woods and stuff, or get way away from people, and often you'll have deer smell you, and they're kind of more curious, and they kind of check you out a little bit. Where I don't see that in real heavily populated areas as much.
Yeah, I think we as humans or hunters, we got to remember deer use their nose like we do our eyes. Like we can look and see, hey, that kid's in that yard, or there's a hunter, 50 yards from me. Whereas they can smell like, hey, that kid's in that yard, or oh shoot, there's someone 50 yards from me. So anyway.
It's the equivalent of if you walked out in your yard and there was a deer track in your yard, you'd be like, a deer walked through my yard. You walk in your living room and they go through your house. You're like, what the heck?
Yeah, right, right.
You're walking through their house.
Buddy. All right, look at this, guys. Check this out. Mark Hadley. He's from the UK on tonight.
Oh, cool.
Really cool.
Yeah. He's asking what kind of deer we hunt. We hunt whitetails for the most part. It sounds like he's coming over here next year to hunt.
Yeah, whitetails are just about anywhere you want to go in the United States.
Yep.
There are some other deer like Sitka deer and
Mule deer
and stuff, but those are more mule deer are more west and south, and
blacktails are out west,
east. Yeah, but whitetails are just about everywhere.
Yep. Cool. I got my boss in my old job was from the UK, from Stanford. Maybe you know him. His name's Nick Adams. He's hard to look up on Facebook though. So anyway. All right, everybody. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button. I think we'll probably hop on. We're going to try. We have internet at our campsite. So we'll see how good it is. Maybe we'll hop on later on in the week or over the weekend one night and talk about my buck on here. See who else is in camp maybe. So everybody, thanks for getting on. Sorry if we didn't get to your questions. We will next time, and talk to you guys later.
See ya.